Dialogic Disciple is an invitation to explore discipleship in dialogue with the world as disciples of the Word. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Dialogic Disciple Podcast. My name is James Johnson and I'm here with my co-host Elizabeth. We have, yet again, a special guest here
all so special.
In the studio with somebody new, a new face around here at Northside Church, Robert Vore. Am I saying that right?
You are, yeah.
All right, Robert, introduce yourself. Tell us who you are.
Yeah, my name is Robert Vore. Like you said, I, as of March, am the site director for within Cumberland Counseling, we call it the Buckhead site, but here obviously at Northside. So the Cumberland Counseling site here at Northside Church, and super excited to be here. It's been great so far. You've
Excellent.
all been super welcoming. Yeah.
Excellent. That's fantastic. We were really excited when we heard that we were actually going to be able to pull this off with the counseling here at Northside Church. It's something that we've been dreaming about and talking about around here for quite some time. I think a real need in our community, real need just in human existence, honestly.
Yeah.
But to partner with somebody as a church and do that, I think that is fantastic. And you've been here since you said the beginning of March?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So how's your time in Northside been so far?
It's been great. I mean, even before that, obviously, there was some meetings with leadership, exec team, stuff like that, and kind of working through some of what that looks like. But, I mean, so far, March, April, we're recording this May 1st, 2nd, something like that.
May 2nd?
Yeah. So those 2 months, they've been great. Everybody's been super welcoming. I mean, nothing has come up that I haven't been able to find help with or anything like that.
Fantastic.
And then we have another therapist, Michelle, who is on our Smyrna team, but is transitioning over. And so right now she's here on Mondays. And so she's downstairs in the bridal suite on Mondays. So if you see a sound machine out there, but I mean, I know she has, her Mondays are getting pretty full already. She's looking at adding another day over here.
Oh, that's awesome.
As her Smyrna clients kind of finish, right? Like, so it's been great.
That's awesome.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Do you see the need being met? Do you have you been filled up? Do you feel like it's been a fruitful thing for the community? Like people are using the service?
Definitely. And I'll say I expect it to continue to grow, right? I mean, therapy is one of those things that we go, oh yeah, that sounds awesome. Like that sounds super helpful. And it just takes some time to probably go through the process, right? Like, I mean, I should probably go to a dentist, right? Like I need to and I go, yeah, I would do that. If someone said, hey, we have a new dentist around, I go, oh, cool. And then 6 months later, I would go, oh yeah, let me make an appointment. Let me figure it right. Like, so it's one of those where I imagine as we are here longer and as people see us around and things like that, right, that it continues to grow. Yeah.
It's one of those things where, like, with the dentist, like, you need to go to the dentist, and it's something that, the dentist is available. You have dental insurance, and you know where the dentist is, and you don't go to the dentist until you have a toothache.
Yeah.
Right? And so therapy is kind of like that, too. A lot of people avoid it until they absolutely desperately need it, and then that's it's always a good time to go, but you can avoid some of that if you go do some preventative care, right?
Sometimes it's when your friend gets a toothache and then you're like, you just had $3,000 worth of work done, maybe I should go for that preventative care appointment.
Right.
Yeah
Exactly. Tell us a little bit about Cumberland Counseling and what they're about and how they operate.
Yeah, so it was birthed out of Cumberland Community Church, actually, and that church up in Smyrna, right, they did this thing where they had every Tuesday, this is years ago, right, every Tuesday, all of their staff had to go into the community with a survey, and they couldn't come back until they had a certain number of surveys done, right, so I guess they stood outside Kroger, or I don't know.
Oh, wow.
Right, and it was basically asking their community, what needs does this community have, right? They had a role.
That's awesome.
They might still, but at the time there was a guy named Rob, and his role was outside the walls pastor, something along those lines. Outside the walls, something, right? Mm-hmm. And so his whole job was like, how do we care for the community? So he had instituted this policy, and what they found was super high on that list was mental health care, right? Mm-hmm. In terms of what that community said they needed, and so they hired a licensed social worker named Alex and said, here's you can use this suite of rooms, provide mental health care, right? So she started doing that and quickly realized, hey, we need some more. I have 20 sessions or whatever. And so she hired a couple others of us. There was 4 her and 3 others on that original team. And at that time, it was just we were independent contractors. She was on staff at the church, and then it kind of grew from there. And what she saw was that model really worked, of hiring one person, and as like a director, they get a salary, and then they can expand that to others, right, as independent contractors.
Sure.
Because typically what happens if you hired one therapist, right, once they hit 20 sessions, 30 sessions a week, something like that, right, you go, well, we're kind of capped out. Yeah. Should we hire another person for another full salary? And so she took that idea and that model and kind of over the years has expanded it and turned it. And so now it's this nonprofit. And it's been really cool watching that process unfold, I think, in terms of watching her faithfully pursue what that should look like, because that could go a bunch of different ways.
Sure.
So that's the model right now, right? So Northside partners with Cumberland Counseling. Me as a site director, I come in, I take care of like logistics, all that, right? Y'all don't have to worry about intake forms and liability insurance and whatever, right? Because all that goes through Cumberland. I handle a lot of that stuff. I get paid, and then we can grow basically to infinity, hiring people as independent contractors who come in and they get paid based on the sessions they do.
Excellent.
Right. So it could we could have 20, 30 counselors here if we needed, right?
Wow.
So that can go forever. So it's a cool model where the church doesn't have to worry about a bunch of that startup stuff, figuring all that out, and then basically doesn't have to pay like increasing amounts of salaries over time, right? Sure. So that's
excellent. Yeah. That's awesome.
There's so much that I appreciate about that whole thing. The first thing that you said that stood out to me is this idea of the church being so responsive to the community.
Yeah.
That is beautiful. I mean, that sounds annoying, right? I mean, like, if I'm that staff person, I have to go out there and interact with people, or, having someone at Kroger asking me questions, like, the logistics of it don't sound amazing. Like, that sounds like a struggle, but wow. I mean, that's what we should be doing, right? Like, what does the community need? We're here to serve. How do we find that out? We have to ask people.
Yeah.
I really love that.
Yeah.
I think that speaks to the mission of the church in general. I've always felt like there's a lot of folks who like to focus on the missions aspect of the church. And obviously we as a church should be in missions. But I think that our primary responsibility is to do mission work in the communities where we find ourselves. And I think one of the places where Northside is in most need of that mission work is with the mental health and spiritual health, emotional health of our congregation and those people who are in our community. So I honestly look at what you're doing here and what Cumberland's doing here as a mission field and mission service more than anything else. Let's talk a little bit about you, though. So you are a licensed therapist. Is it LPC? Is that the technical term?
Tell us about your letters.
Yes, tell us about your letters, but also like why are you doing this? Why did you choose this? And how does it interact with your faith, assuming that you have faith?
Yeah. Yeah. Let me. I'll sort through. Those
just go try to pick where you want to start in and jump.
Yeah. Yes, I'm an LPC, which is a licensed professional counselor in the state of Georgia. The letters matter as much. They don't matter to most people. They matter to the licensing board and then like other mental health professionals, right? So, I'm an LPC. There's some other letters in there that don't matter. There's various certifications and stuff. But we won't worry about those too much, right? My undergrad is in music education.
Ooh.
Okay.
Which is a little bit surprising, I think, for people sometimes. But that's primarily what I did. That's
Oftentimes when we find out that somebody can do music stuff, we ask them to sing a song. Is there a song that you would like to sing for us today on the podcast?
No,
okay.
It's education, so you can teach us a song.
Yeah.
You take my guitar here and
yeah, I could. If you want me to play some drums, that was like my focus instrument.
Excellent.
But,
nice.
Yeah. But so coming out of college, that wasn't really. I never super felt passionate about that. But as an 18-year-old, me playing drums for a couple hours a day sounded better than studying something else for a couple hours a day.
Sure.
So and then education was a safer path than like performance or whatever. Right? So,
yeah.
So coming out of that, I ended up doing some college ministry work based on the campus ministry that my wife went to and really loved. And then we did international college ministry in England and all of
that's cool.
So throughout that, and then I'll say some of my like serving in churches kind of experience, right? What I found is that I was pretty open on, you know, kind of first wave of social media back when it was cool to post things, where now it's like, you know, but I was pretty honest about my own mental health struggles, past and present at that time. And what ended up happening was every ministry that I worked at or church that I served at, right, people would come to me with those types of questions. Yeah. Whether it was college students or other staff members, or like I served in the children's ministry at a church, and one of the staff members came to me, and I was just a volunteer, and said, "Hey, we noticed some self-harm on one of our youth. What do we do with that?" Right? Like, how do we even, and they didn't phrase it quite like that. Right. But so something in me said like, okay, I think by and large, the experience that I'm having is church and ministry, like faith leaders, right? With the posture of like, we really want to do something in terms of mental health, but like, we're not super sure what to do. Like, we're not sure how to get into that, where the line is, what, you know, how to be helpful. And so the year that we were doing college ministry in England, we were really trying to figure out what was next. And for me, I kind of landed on this 2-part thing of, I want to help people individually, right? So in those conversations when students were coming to me with things, how do I become better and maybe learn some more tools about what to do in those moments, hence individual therapy. And then how do I, if I believe in faith communities and faith leaders' role in that, how do I help equip them to play whatever role they can, right? Like, how do I help our faith leaders, whether that's official or not, right? Like, if you lead a small group, you're a faith leader, right? Like, how do I help build that bridge and equip those people? Because we know that people turn to faith leaders most often in times of crisis, right? And so how do I help build that bridge some and equip them? And so came back, went to grad school, and then kind of things have rolled from there.
Excellent. That's really cool. So your interest and passion for doing therapy and what you do for a living really came out of your faith journey itself, like.
Yeah, a combination of that and then my own experiences in therapy, you know, in college and out of college and things like that. But so my own experiences with therapy, and then from like the kind of ministry, right? Because when I was working in college ministry, in-depth, one-on-one, like, let's get into it, I was like, this is great. And if you said like, we're doing free dinner for 300 people, go and chit chat, I was like, this is horrible, you know. So like, could I shift towards the intentional, you know, as opposed to maybe the outreach?
I don't know if you know this or not, but we're looking for a youth minister right now here at Northside Church. If the Lord is tugging at you one way or the other.
I when we came back, I actually taught music at a private school for 2 years while I was in grad school. So I used the degree a little bit, right? So you know.
Justified.
Great. All that student debt is totally worth it. And part of that was like a relational role with middle and high schoolers, and I did like it. I will not be applying for that job. I did. I mean, I do love, like, I focus a lot with adolescents and things like that. So
you're already doing youth ministry in a way.
Yeah.
Would you say, so you said that part of your drive from this came from your own experience with therapy and kind of, I guess, dealing with your own stuff from the past or whatever. Would you say that that's a common experience for most therapists? Do you think that is a common, like, reason why people get into doing what you're doing? I say that because I think some people, I ask that because I think some people have a bit of a, not a phobia, but they have a little bit of a hesitation to seek therapy whenever they feel like they need it. And knowing that the therapist or the people that are providing this service, you know, have their own stuff, that they've been through this too, it might be a way of comforting them, bringing them into jumping over that.
Yeah, I would say certainly for some percentage, right? I mean, I don't know if it's half and half or whatever. I mean, some people, they studied psychology and they, like, you know, kind of just roll into it. I know in a lot of grad schools, you're encouraged to go do your own therapy. Some require it, you know, some don't, you know. And so I think there is hopefully a lot of self-reflecting and healing and stuff like that in that process. But I think most therapists that I know, which is a higher percentage than average, obviously, you know, maybe you're a normal person, pretty much all of them have a therapist as well, right? Okay. So there's one of my old supervisors had a joke that, like, you could trace like the circle of therapists back and it would like loop in on itself.
Yeah.
So most people either have that picture in mind, or that there's like a boss therapist at some point. You could like work your way all the way up. But you know, I think
the one who's figured out how to not need therapy.
Right. Yeah. So you know, I think most therapists have a therapist or have at different points in time. You know, like, but obviously they are people. You know, so yeah.
What do you think is the main difference between coming to a therapist that I have made an appointment with and sitting down with a pastor?
Oh, I was going to ask that question. Good.
Yeah.
Maybe not even difference, maybe benefit.
Or even if it's not, or even if it's just like a good friend or something, right? Like, I think a pastor or someone that you trust, just another person in your life that you trust.
Yeah, I think obviously some training differences and specificity there, right? So like I have a decent amount of training in suicidality or, you know, non-suicidal self-injury, right? Like self-harm. I have a lot of pretty specific anxiety training, right? So there's, I mean, and we all have, you know, kind of continuing ed requirements. And so some of that, the difference, I'll start with maybe like a friend, right? I think the main difference there is that none of my stuff, at least theoretically, is in the room, right? So ethically, I can't offer therapy to somebody that I have a previous relationship with, right?
Yeah.
So like I can't offer therapy. I wouldn't offer to you guys, right? I know when I came on staff, I said like, hey, I won't see y'all as staff members. Like y'all can't come to me for therapy. You can use one of our other therapists.
Right.
Because I don't want any of my needs in the room, right? So like if I was offering therapy to like my best friend, right? If they said, oh, I'm really feeling super lonely and none of my friends care about me, it really seems like, and so for me, I would go, oh, well, that's kind of hurtful. Like what am I a bad friend? Like what, right? There's stuff of mine. And in therapy, ideally, that's not the case, right? Obviously therapists are people. And so hopefully they're really aware of like, if some of their stuff is getting mixed up in there, right? But like my goal isn't to accomplish a specific thing other than whatever your goal is, right? Now with a pastor, I mean, obviously the focus is a little bit different there in terms of like, again, I'm not trying to, and I don't think all pastors are, right? But if I come to a pastor and say, hey, I'm really struggling with anxiety and whatever, right? Like your answers are coming from a different lens, and that's appropriate because they're coming to you probably for a spiritual aspect there. Sure. And that's part of therapy because we all have spirituality, but I'm not imparting any of my stuff onto you, right? So if they say, oh, well, what do you believe about this, right? I probably won't answer that super specifically because like, I don't know that it matters, right? Like why in therapist school, they teach you to say like, well, why do you want to know? Why is it important that you know what I think? And like, I think that way of phrasing it is garbage. Like you sound like a weird robot. If a therapist is listening and you use that, that's fine. To me, I was like, I would never say that. Right. But I do think I would be honest about like, well, I don't know how much that matters here. Like what is it that's important to you? Yeah. And if there are things that are helpful or not helpful or, you know, so I would just say specificity of training maybe, and then some of that like lens and some of that kind of like one step removed.
Some distance there,
yeah. And it's making me think of like this opportunity to have your own reflection and growth kind of contained, right? When you have that kind of set up in a relationship like you're talking about, if I'm talking to a pastor or a friend, someone that I have a different type of accountability to, there's the conversation shifts, or we're talking about you as well. We're having a two-sided relationship versus essentially a part of your role in the room as a therapist is to keep that growth and that reflection on the person that has made the appointment, right? Like, you know, all right, let's not put it off on the other person, right? You know, this is your chance to keep it on you and to figure out your own brain.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with doing both of those, right? I mean,
absolutely. No, that's not what I'm saying at all.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I'm just thinking through the differences, you know, because people are like, oh, well, I can just go talk to a friend. I can just go talk to my pastor. What is the difference that this sort of ministry offers?
Yeah.
Where do you see, if any, tension between the mental health world and the Jesus world, for lack of a better term, right? Like, do you see those two pitted against each other at all in anything? I have a couple things in mind, so I'm just curious if you ever see tension between those worlds.
Are you asking, do I see that exist, or do I think that it necessarily exists? I don't think it needs to. I think it does often, right? I mean, I think you can find plenty of churches where like, hey, don't go to therapists, whatever. Like you can find that. If we say don't worry about that for now, because that's a separate conversation where like maybe we just say fine, that is what it is. But even if you come to me and say, no, my church is like pretty supportive of mental health.
Yeah.
I still think sometimes we get into a weird spot, I think, with what healing looks like, what a lived experience of faith looks like, right? So if you say, and I'm trying to think of like a concise way to put it to cut down on your editing time.
No, go ahead.
I edit a podcast. I totally get it. Yeah. It eats up tons of my time. So I think if you say, well, I have faith and therefore I shouldn't still feel this or that, or I shouldn't still be angry at my old boss because whatever, and I'm supposed to forgive, right? Sure. If there's no should, as we'll just leave that there, but also how we line up kind of the cognitive, like what I believe with air quotes in kind of like a post-enlightenment, like the head matters most world, with like what my lived experience is. I think validating the lived experience side and then working to like line those two up is really tricky and hard at the process of being human. And that sometimes we don't do a great job church-wise broadly at articulating that like the ideals that we want, it's okay to be in process towards those. It's not just like poof, here you go, like you're good. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Like faith is not a magic button that just heals everything instantly.
Right. Yeah.
No, that's really good. In fact, as Methodists, we try to lean into that quite a bit.
Right.
With our whole process of sanctification, we like to talk about, although we don't think we talk about it enough. I do think that we, as just human beings, but particularly as Christians, we put into different compartments mental health and physical health and spiritual health, and then we don't think that any of these things connect with each other.
Yeah.
And I'm curious as to how we might be able to think about mental health and emotional health as being absolutely essential and connected and part of our spiritual health. And you've kind of already hinted at that with your answer before, but let's talk about, and Elizabeth, you jump in here too, but let's talk about how can we think about therapy as being a spiritual practice? How can we think about therapy as being something that helps us to bring those things back together to the wholeness of the person?
Yeah, I think you're right in talking about it as, you said, the wholeness of the person, right? Like a holistic idea that these things aren't siloed from each other.
Yes.
I think that is the way to go about it, right? And so you said something earlier, I think before we hit record, therapy as spiritual practice, right? Mm-hmm. And I think, so I mentioned in my last answer, right, the idea of like lining up our cognitive, like what we ascribe to cognitively as I believe this thing, with our lived experience of that thing. And I think that is where the rubber meets the road there, of like how we live these things out. And therapy can be a good place to figure out maybe like where that stuckness is, right? So I talked about forgiveness in the last bit, right? Or if I say, okay, I want to be really patient and peaceful in my interactions with my kids, right? I have 2 small kids, and I think, faith-wise, I go, yes, that's how I want to interact with them. When my kids are throwing mashed potatoes at the wall, right? And I go, okay, I feel anger. If I'm responding out of that, like, okay, that doesn't line up with what I think, like, okay, my like faith side goes, how I want to interact in this moment. That doesn't. So how do I line those up, right? Yeah. Well, I can go to therapy and go, okay, hey, I'm really having a hard time. And then, okay, well, what's happening in that moment, right? Like, okay, you feel anger. That's real and valid. How do we respond differently, right? Like, what is it about that thing? Maybe not. Maybe mashed potatoes at the wall is a bad example because, like, logically, yes. But say I compliment you on your dress because I think it looks great, and you go, with both of you, because you're both wearing dresses, right?
Right.
And you go, when you talked about that, that made me very angry. I hate it, right? Mm-hmm. And so I like rushed out of here. Okay, there's something to that. How do we investigate some of like, oh, what is that? That there's a reason for that. How can we dig into that? And acknowledging that and working with some of that, then maybe we can kind of like metabolize some of that and move through it to get to, okay, how do I respond in the way that I want to, the way that I think aligns with my faith, right? And that's a process over time, not just again like I'll try harder this week to be patient.
Yeah.
I don't know what that means. Try harder, right? Like I don't.
Yeah, right. So for what I hear you saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I hear you saying that there's a reason why we respond to things in certain ways. So there's a reason why I get angry at certain things, the reason why I feel joy at certain things, or I get anxious at certain things. And part of the process of therapy is to kind of unpack maybe that logic, that reasoning behind that.
Yes, the logic and the reasoning and the lived experience, which may not be super logical to us, right?
right.
Yes.
Even as much as we would like it to be, right?
Yeah.
So I like to talk about like emotions, right? Feelings giving us information and energy, right? So when I feel anxious, right? If we say, okay, anxiety, broad brush, is fear in the future tense, right? I'm feeling the physiological symptoms of fear right now, fight or flight stuff, but based on a potential future threat, right? Mm-hmm. So if I came in here and I'm feeling super anxious before we record, right? I can try and talk myself out of that. Hey, it's going to be okay. Nobody's going to, come egg your office after they listen. Like, y'all both seem nice. You're not trying to trap me. That may or may not be that helpful. But physiologically, I go, okay, my body is perceiving some type of threat maybe, right? In this case, probably threat of judgment or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. Again, future-based, because anxiety, future-based. And then it's giving me energy to respond to a threat, right? I should run away. Or I should anger, maybe there's like a threat or an obstruction I need to move towards, right? Like it's giving information about like my body, my nervous system's perception, and then energy to respond in some kind of way. Perception being the key word because it's not always super accurate, right?
Right.
But it may be based on your lived experience that like, yeah, that's adaptive, right? Yeah. If you grew up in a household where anytime you expressed a need, that was not met or that was met with anger or something, right? Yeah, to express a need now in some sense is going to feel very scary to me because my lived experience says that's not safe.
Yeah.
But in a healthy relationship, I would like to be able to express my needs in some kind of way. I can't just go, well, I never need anything, right? So how do I work through that in a way where I go, okay, how do I navigate through that lived experience and respond and such and become practice, right, over time, like get more comfortable with that in safe situations, right? Yeah.
So we respond to the world because of our perception of the world, and that perception is a lived, it's a trained thing. It's a practice thing, right? It's something that we've been habituated into, and maybe sometimes our perceptions of situations or people or whatever are not accurate. They're not actually truthful. But because we are habituated into that perception, we can't just kind of talk ourselves out of that perception. We need to take time to sit back and reflect and break it down, right?
Yeah.
That's fascinating. I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me.
Oh, and I love the body element of it too that you talk about. A friend of mine that's a therapist always references the book The Body Keeps the Score, right? And this idea that we tend to think about all these things just as being in our head, right? The emotions are something that live in our brain, but the body holds them.
Yeah. And
so how do we address not just the things that the thought trains that are happening in our head, but how do we address it in our body as well?
Yeah.
And that's so important. My gosh, I love that you're talking about this.
Yeah, if there was a highway going from your body to your brain and your brain to your body, right, and there's 10 lanes and there's information being passed up and down, how many lanes do you think are going up, like body to brain, and how many lanes do you think are going the other way?
Oh, wow.
If there's 10, right, so percentages.
There's 10. I would say it's either half and half or there's more from the body going up to the brain.
I would tend to think that the brain, I don't know, half and half. I'll go half and half. That's a very boring answer.
Yeah. So it's 80% up and 20% down.
Wow,
right? Okay. So when you're scared, what you need, the cognitive side does matter because I need to determine whether there is a threat or not, right? Because if there is a threat in this situation, I'm feeling fear, then I need all that, right?
Yeah.
I need the adrenaline to fight or run away. I need the muscle tension. I need my pupils to dilate, so I'm focused on one thing. Like, I need all of that.
Yeah.
It's all helpful. It's adaptive. If not, which is a cognitive, right? Like, I need to be able to sort through that. But then what I need is like a felt sense of safety to help kind of turn off the smoke alarm, right?
Yeah.
So like if you think about a little kid who goes, I'm really scared, there's a monster in my closet, right? You might go, hey, logically, have you ever seen a monster? Come on, right?
Right.
But also you'd probably, hey, I'll give you a hug and I'm going to talk, I'll bend down to your level and I'll kind of talk, right? Like that felt sense of safety is what is going to be super helpful, right?
Yeah.
And I think what happens often is because we're so focused on the cognitive side, talking ourselves out of it doesn't work. And then we get kind of what we call secondary emotions, right? So like I feel anxious, and now I'm embarrassed that I feel anxious, and I'm angry that I feel embarrassed that I feel anxious, and right, like, and so we get in these spirals because I should be able to like not do that, right? And that doesn't, your body is reacting in a way that makes sense of like, I'm perceiving some type of potential threat. I'm trying to keep you alive.
Yeah. And I think that's where, like you mentioned earlier, that's another place where faith can come in and can say, unhelpfully, oh, well, I shouldn't have done that because, XYZ, or I feel bad and now I'm guilty because that's not how Jesus would act, or whatever, and then another storm happens.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good way to talk about the role of faith in this process, because I think one of the main roles of faith in our life is to shift our perception of reality and what we think is real and what we see and what we know. And if our perception of the world that has created all of these kind of instinctual and habitual reactions in us, if that is flawed or broken because, let's say, because of sin in the world, because we've been trained the wrong way, because the world's trained us the wrong way, or maybe we had parents that didn't treat us the right way, or train us the right way, or treat us the right way, then the work of faith is to slowly change that perception. But it's not like a overnight thing. It's something that has to be done on a very slow process so we can see the work of God and the Spirit in the world. In a lot of ways, it reminds me of the conversation that we've had many times of this this tension in the history of our faith between tradition and experience. And this idea that, tradition tells us how we should act or how we should be, and experience is just what we are. So it's not about should or shouldn't, it's just what we are. And when those things don't match up, like you're talking about, Robert, that's where just simply believing, and even if you have a deep faith in Christ, that it needs to be processed in a way that brings those two back together, and so that the tension is not necessarily resolved, but can be held in some kind of sanity, right?
So if we use fear as a good example, right? Because do not fear, consistent throughout Scripture, right?
Every time an angel shows up and just blows away your perception of reality, they're like, don't be afraid.
Right. And I read that not as do not experience the emotion of fear in this moment, because that's part of how you're created, right?
Right.
But don't take the next step based on purely fear, right?
Yeah.
And so if we can separate for a moment like our internal reaction and our external response, right? My internal reaction being the thing that happens, and I'm not choosing that from a drop-down list. So you say, hey, how's your day going? And I feel anger. I didn't choose that. Right. So to judge that is a little bit like not That's super really good, helpful. But if I can go, okay, let me pause for a second, and maybe that moment isn't the time, but at some point I can approach that with curiosity and compassion, right? Of like what's happening there. But in that moment, if I can take a second and then go, okay, that's giving me information and energy, but also my response, I do get to choose, right? And the way I view like wisdom is like the synthesization of those things, right? Like of the emotional information and the logical side of what do I want to do here? What lines up with what I believe, my goals, my values, right? So if we can do that, then over time, our initial like reaction can change, right? So if I'm really scared of doing whatever, right? An angel shows up, or that would be scary, and they say, "Go do this thing," and I go, "That's super scary." Can I do that anyway? Trusting that God shows up, right? And if he does, then I go, okay, next time something is scary, based on my lived experience, I have 1% less experienced fear in the initial moment.
Yeah.
And then I do it again and again and again and again and again. And if I do that enough times, then my initial like reaction, right, shifts towards my lived experience.
Yeah.
Right. Neuroplasticity shows this, that like our brains have the capability to change based on our experiences over time. For most people, like your entire lifetime kind of goes, right, like childhood super high, goes down, adolescence is super high, and then goes back down some, but like that's still, you can change that, right? And when I think about the scripture writers writing about like working out my salvation, right, like that's what makes sense in that to me. Isn't like, can I work out, like can I earn something over time, but like can I more and more experience things based on faith that make me uncomfortable, that becomes more and more my natural tendencies.
Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah, I mean it's learning how to trust God in a real way. You were gonna say something.
Well, I was just gonna say, James, you've said many times, I've heard you say in Bible studies, that really at the end of the day, you can boil down what Jesus is saying as pay attention. Yeah. Just pay attention. And to me, this gives that legs, right? That's what that means, right? Pay attention. It's that the difference between I wish I want to respond in a certain way, and here's how I can actually figure out how to do that in those moments.
And I think that's really something important that you said. I want to repeat because I think it's really important, is that we oftentimes, I think, in the tradition that I grew up anyway, in Christianity, I grew up in a very conservative tradition, and we were taught to feel bad or feel guilty about whatever our instant feelings were about a situation. Whether it was a pretty girl walk by, or you get really angry at your friend, or whatever happens, like you were taught, oh, you sinned, right? And I think what you're telling me, at least what I'm hearing you say, is that the initial feeling that we have in any kind of reaction or moment is not really something to judge, because that's not something we really have a lot of control over. But our response to that and how we move forward from there is. Yeah. Yeah. And
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's where you get in. Sorry, I was going to say that sometimes, I was doing a teaching thing once, and I said like, hey, all your feelings are valid, right? And a guy afterwards, he was like, so when I'm angry, I'm allowed to throw plates at the wall and yell. I was like, no, that's your response. That's what you're doing with the anger. I'm saying the sentence, I feel blank, is valid because that is your lived experience, right? I don't get to say, no, you don't. If you do, you do. And you didn't choose that, but you did choose the response of throwing plates at the wall or whatever, right? And maybe that's very hard for you to build that gap of like in between those two things, and that's impulse control, that's regulation, right? Like that is very incredibly hard for most of us, right? Like we tend to think of those as one thing, but they're not.
They are separate.
Yeah. Well, and I think the value of learning to think that way, James, you're talking about, okay, so we have, certain people believe that it's that initial thing, that's the sin, the initial thought, the feeling, the sin. For me, the benefit of learning how to separate those and address them is inner peace, right? Yeah. That's, we can become at peace with ourselves by learning the difference between those things and learning where, if you want to talk about it this way, where the sin actually happens, like putting the sin on the action instead of the feeling, right? It's that self-compassion piece. It's the understanding. That's peaceful on the inside.
And that, to be honest, that's how you change over time the initial reaction anyway, right? Like squishing it down or judging it, right? Like if you're listening and you go, oh, I successfully judged myself and hated myself out of ever feeling anger, come talk to me, because I don't believe you did. I think maybe you like squished it down real bad, but then it came out later on somewhere. Like, no doubt. But that's not how you like change the initial thing, right? Like working with it and having different experiences is.
Yeah. And and I think Jesus can provide a model for some of that, in the sense that how many times does the Gospels tell us that Jesus was indignant? He was upset with his disciples because they were just dense as whatever. But his response, how he handled the situation, was much different than probably what he initially wanted to do. And then even in like in Sermon on the Mount, when Jesus says something to the effect of, you have heard it said, "Do not murder," but I tell you that if you even are angry with somebody, that you've already committed murder in your heart. But what he means by that isn't isn't just the moment of anger, but to kind of to dwell on it and to hold that kind of grudge or whatever against somebody.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's when you let it eat you alive, right? I think there's another distinction there to be had, right? The difference between I had an initial feeling, I had a response. Okay, I can have compassion on that. I can say that's all right, that's valid, it's fine. It's when you ruminate on it and dwell on it, and it becomes a pattern of thought, and it becomes much more than just an initial emotional response, that it causes a lot of damage. And that, I think, also is, I don't know, sinful. I would say it feels sinful in my head when it happens, right? That's the thing that I feel like is controllable, right? It's what you're talking about, Robert. We have control over that.
Yeah.
Well, Robert, this has been a great conversation, man. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to come in and sit down with us. I find it incredibly fascinating. Hopefully we can have you back on before too long. We just kind of touched on the surface of a lot of different things today that I would love to get deeper into. And I think I would encourage anyone out there who's listening, whether you're a member of Northside or not, if you feel like you have a need for trying to bridge this gap between response and feeling, that we have people here that can resource you for that. And you can, Robert, where can people contact you at?
Yeah, you can email counseling@northsideumc.org.
Perfect.
.org.
Yep.
Yes.
Or you can go to y'all's website /counseling. All that information is there. And I'll say, I know I mentioned to me and Michelle, we have a Smyrna location and a Lawrenceville location, and all of those therapists are also available if you're willing to do virtual, right? And so if you're like, I don't know, this guy looks super young and I'm not, Mondays don't work, that's okay. Like we can match you with someone, whether it's on our team or we can, find good referrals. But all of those therapists are also available for working with folks.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much again for being here today. Elizabeth, thank you.
It was a delight.
And guys, we will see you next week.